So this session is called Touch Me, What's Next for Interfaces. And we've got a fantastic panel up here. And we're going to spend the next 75 minutes talking about not what we do today, but some of the things that we're going to be able to do in the future. And actually, that's not really true, because we are doing a lot of these things today, too. And we're going to talk about what inspires us towards doing some of these things, and also how we can really deliver them today, too. We're also going to show some video, because a lot of the stuff that we're going to be doing today and talking about is going to be hard to show. So I'm going to be kind of a video driver for some of these guys as they talk. So there may be a few hiccups along the way as we do it, but trust me, it'll be worth it as we go through this. So again, my background is I'm a user experience evangelist for Microsoft, and in addition to this panel, anybody here going to South by Southwest? We have a companion panel to this one that's being run by one of my peers and colleagues named Evan Hirsch, who's from the Surface team. It's about Hollywood and inspiration for next generation interfaces too. So those of you that are fortunate enough to be at both this event and that one, I highly suggest you check that panel out as well. And I've got a great panel here today. I've got Dale Hergestad from Schematic. A lot of the stuff you saw in the video, especially from Minority Report, interfaces that he worked on with Steven Spielberg to visualize what computer interfaces could be in the future. I also have Yoshihiro Saito from Second Factory. And Second Factory, right?
Yes.
Yes. And I spelled Second Story here. My mistake. I'm very sorry. I must buy you drinks tonight, so I apologize. And then I have Doug Cook from 1323 on the end. And Doug needed a haircut in this picture, but that's all right, Doug. And then I have David Wolf, Vice President at Synergy Systems. And he'll be talking about some of the interfaces that they built, which is very ironic. There's a system Maestro that is very much inspired from Minority Report that we'll talk about. And we have Daniel McCoskey from our Surface team. And that's it. So what I'd like to do to start off is I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about ourselves here. And I wanted to start, Yoshihiro, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Yoshihiro Saito. I'm from Japan. I'm a senior experience designer and vice president of Second Factory. I've been working focused on the emotion and experience, and a usually organized project is experience design perspective. I'm not a technical side person, but I really like the new technologies like you are. And I grew up with a Flash.
Oops, sorry about that.
Especially as a motion graphics designer, I believe we can make a better computing world to use some UX techniques. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm Daniel McCoskey. I manage the interaction design team at Surface. I have two of my interaction designers from my team are here supporting. My background is in actually international relations with a minor in multimedia. I explicitly decided that I was going to do anything but design when I was in college because my father's a graphic designer. I needed to chart my own path. But I matured and rid myself of that constraint, and I've been at Microsoft for 5 years. I've been working within MSN, some of the early design strategy that led to what is now Windows Live and Microsoft Live. And I've worked on the emerging markets team, thinking about how Microsoft can serve the needs for folks that make $5 to $15 a day in Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And I am now working on the Surface team, and my inspirations are human beings, people, how we live, act, and breathe, and finding ways that technology can better align to what they want to do.
Thank you. Dale.
Yeah, I'm Dale Hergestad. I'm the Chief Creative Officer at Schematic. A few more Schematic folks who are here in the audience, colleagues. My background personally is actually in design, but I quickly, out of college, moved into motion graphics, and I'm older than most people in this room, but I've been around a lot of broadcast design, so my experience doesn't really come from the web, it really comes from television, and the dream was always to make this as rich a process as possible. I've done a lot of interactive work. Most of it's around interactive television from a 10-foot experience, but many different distances. Okay.
I'm Dave Wolf. I'm a vice president at Synergy. We're a rich internet applications design and development firm headquartered in DC. We build rich, interactive, stunning, sticky, engaging software for people. We announced the Silverlight practice at Mix last year, and we actually formed something called Synergy Labs, which is a bit of an R&D arm of Synergy for researching the next technologies and things that are going to affect how we build software and interact with software and experience software. And some of the stuff you'll be seeing today is the direct result of labs.
And I'm Doug Cook. I'm an experienced architect at 1323. 1323 is just a small design firm in Austin, Texas. We focus on visual design, user interface design, and rapid prototyping. But we have a specialty in WPF and a lot of Microsoft's foundational technologies. Before that, my background is actually in user interface development. And before 1323, I was at Frog Design for 6 or 7 years as a principal technologist.
Okay, wonderful. So what I thought we'd do is start off the conversation with me asking our panelists a few questions. But I suspect that a lot of folks in the audience would actually like to ask these folks questions too. So what I'd like to do is let's spend about a half hour going through moderating some questions and getting inspiration. Think about questions you want to ask these guys too, because we're going to have the opportunity to do that as well. And where I wanted to start this conversation was with inspiration. And Dale, I wanted to start with you. I think of the few movies that have really influenced me as a designer, and I'm someone that started off not as a designer, but as a film and motion graphic person too. And Blade Runner comes to mind, but then I got to say Minority Report comes to mind in terms of interfaces. Can you talk a little bit about the process and the experience you went through to think about all the things that happened in that movie?
Yes, and the first thing I'll say is that I wasn't the only one working on those. I certainly would give credit to. There was MIT Media Lab and my little company in Hollywood. We were all working on this project. And we all, by consensus, came, the directive was, come up with an interface design that would be 60 years in the future. So, but the consensus was it would be gesture. That my thing was get rid of the hardware, just respond naturally to screens. And also screens would be like wallpaper. TVs are not like a piece of furniture, but just you see wallpapers as just surfaces of video, like you saw in the movie. The movie was a very fortunate experience for me because it was it made a big impact, obviously, on our culture, really. I mean, and since then I've been really involved with things like spatial navigation in regular remote control navigation for 10 foot. And those things are moving naturally now to being able to utilize. They're almost gestural ready, and we're proving some of that now. So some of the dreams of Minority Report are actually happening now. So
that's very cool. So when I think about inspiration, Dave, I kind of think about Maestro a little bit and the project that you worked on with Synergy Labs. Can you tell me a little bit about how you were inspired to go about that project? And maybe what I can do is I can show some parts of it right now.
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Okay.
I guess we saw Minority Report before. It's hard not to connect that we were inspired by Minority Report. A lot of these things, we're trying to, through labs, take a lot of these inspirations and make them real, make them the kinds of things real people could use and touch and interact with software. And a lot of that is standing on the shoulders of giants, quite frankly, and others. The research that came out of Schematic and Dale's team, people like Johnny Chung Lee and Brian Peake's work around the Wiimote, and seeing that they had managed code libraries, we kind of said, hey, could we build the Minority Report interface using infrared technology? Looks a lot like what we saw in Minority Report, and have a multi-touch experience that we never actually have to touch. So that's what you'll see here. The receiver's actually a Wiimote. Those gloves have infrared transmitters tied Bluetooth to the mouse emulator, which is then interacting multi-touch with the interface. Lots of gestures you'll see here dealing with, how do you decide what we call a two-finger pinch to move individual elements, or here you can pinch all 3 fingers in a second and bring the entire imagery back together and move it as one piece. Again, I think 3 fingers is what there was in Minority Report as well. So clearly the inspiration was take a great interactive design idea and can we make it come alive? And then as you'll see later in the video, can we try to connect it to things we might want to do in real software today? Things like in RIAs, like you saw in the keynotes, everything's about how we visualize data. Well, the next obvious question is, we're doing visualizing information and data. Now, how do I interact with it, right? And that was the next step that led to all this.
Very cool. So, and I think if we go to the end of the video, you do have a few concepts here where we play with that, don't we? If we scoot over here.
There we go.
And talking about manipulating data, and that's kind of the next frontier is, we all want to pay our bar tab, on a Surface table. When can we do that, by the way? But we also want to manipulate data, right? And if we think about data visualization right now, gestural interfaces might be the next step for this kind of stuff. And Doug, this kind of brings me to you and maybe some of the stuff that you've done at Synergy. I wonder if I can show some of the stuff that you've been playing with when you think of touch-based interfaces and stuff like that too, and you can tell us what kind of inspires you about those interfaces?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great things about touch experience is we often at 1323 kind of talk about invisible UI or implicit UI. I think there's a revolution going on in the user interface industry now that you no longer have to have classical models of information architecture for your applications. Touch not only opens up a whole new line of interaction, I think it also affords all sorts of new opportunities in terms of user interfaces. And we're a little more interested in natural interactions, so probably less interested in sort of new input methods to interact with devices, and more interested in finding ways to sort of implicitly interact with devices.
Okay. So my next question is, we've all built real interfaces right now. And tell me a little bit about some of the realities. What's exciting about building touch-based interfaces, but what are some things that maybe the audience may not be aware of? Is it hard? Is it easier? I mean, what are some of the challenges that present themselves with it? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Or?
I mean, I think across the board, to kind of connect the dots here, we're talking about how do we make and create broad strokes of reality. These things don't have to be too real, right? But they have to feel real and natural enough that as you're saying, it's obvious or accessible or approachable to people. We're seeing that, I think you'll see that in rich internet apps all over. Technologies like Silverlight with vector drawing and animations and the ability to add physics engines and lets us kind of create these broad strokes of reality.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the challenges that we face is, like Doug was saying, we have a philosophy that the content is the interface. And so we have a very, very high bar for considering any type of a button or any kind of explicit action. But if you have an experience and you want it to be a little bit richer, beyond just simple, so let's say photos, moving a photo, resizing a photo, rotating a photo, if you want to do anything else, let's say you want to share that photo or you want to do something else, we have one of two paths. If we stay pure to the content as the interface and only use gesture and touch, then we have to have a system where everyone can remember those gestures. And I think for anyone who's done web development, there's the law of 7, right? I can only remember plus or minus 2, 7 items plus or minus 2 at any given time, which is why navigation systems start with those amount of choices. So what do you do when you have more of a complex system, but you want to keep a pure interface? We have some solutions to that, which I may not be able to talk about in great detail, but
sure.
That's one of the challenges with natural interaction.
But it sounds to me like design language for gestural-based interfaces. You really have to think that through, right? Just like we think of systems designed for a website, for gestural-based interfaces, there's a whole bunch of variables that we need to think about, both in maybe public environments and private environments, right? And there's a big difference between a touch interface that might be on your phone versus on your wall in a public environment and space. One of the things that I'm curious about, Yoshihiro, and I was wondering if I could ask you, what are some of the challenges you see with touch-based interfaces? When we've talked, there's a lot of conventions around the mouse and the cursor that we know when I move on a screen where I am. But what are some of the challenges you see with touch-based interfaces?
Okay. First challenge is the finger at the target point. There is one simple problem, right? And second is we cannot use rollover event. That's a simple one, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And third one is developing embedded GUI has always limitation of hardware spec. What do you think about that? Yeah.
Well, on the second point, depending on the technology, I think this idea of hover or rollover state may be realized. So with a vision system, that's something that you can see beyond just a capacitive, and you could have a rollover state. Yeah. But can you repeat the third question?
There is a limitation of hardware spec.
Oh,
okay.
Specification.
Yeah.
Well, I think the challenge is you're asking about, you really need to understand your hardware very well to make this work, right? And there's a lot of challenges. There's the sophistication of, maybe a model like the iPhone, right, or Surface. But then there are, people that are going out and hacking Wii remotes, right? And they're taking infrared receivers and they're building their own things, right? Or you build kind of the homegrown large screen 10-foot display. But maybe we could elaborate on that. Are there hardware limitations? I mean, is that a barrier that you think about right now in your head, or do you try to kind of set that aside when you come up with the ideas?
One thing I would say, actually, before you get to the hardware, is that one of the main challenges of the touch interface is that it's a lot different than a two-dimensional graphical user interface, which is on the desktop, I know explicitly when somebody's clicked something or when somebody's rolled over something. And I know where the cursor is at all times. It's unambiguous. With touch interfaces, and especially once you then factor in the differences in hardware, it's more about, especially when you figure in like gestures or glossing or different interactions, it becomes much more of an art than a science, and it's all about pattern recognition. So what you find very quickly is that you get a lot of false positives depending on your touch interface. So simple things where you might be able to drag things depending on the touch experience. You might be trying to drag something over, and then all of a sudden you lose contact.
Right.
Or with other natural modalities such as speech, you have the same problem there. It's the difference between Austin and Boston. It starts sounding very similar, and the computer's the same way. So the computer, you need to design the interface in such a way that these technologies are going to have to mature. Like right now, there's no dictionary of gestures necessarily. So one point when we were kind of talking about this conference and this session earlier, Daniel brought up, is that you're constantly having to kind of innovate at the same time as you're developing the interface. So there's a sense in which there's kind of no net.
So kind of building a house when one half of it's on fire at the same time?
Something like that, maybe.
And some of it, when you're trying to focus on what look like these broad strokes of reality, you have to keep it both tactile as well as productive, right? And what I mean is, so take Maestro. You probably don't notice it, and it wasn't until we began building it that your dominant hand has a pretty big impact on how tactile the interface is. So the system actually checks which hand comes up first and makes that hand the dominant hand, right? And makes those decisions. Things that until we began using it, why is that not tactile? Why does that not feel right in this reality? And it's because we had a dominant hand. But there are other things that, and when I say broad strokes of reality, we don't have to, I want to keep that in mind, because if you take the mouse as an example, the mouse isn't linear. It's progressive, right? I can move the mouse half an inch and jump at the whole length of the screen. Our minds adjust to that very, very quickly. So it's that, for us, I think the challenge is keeping it both tactile but productive, right? I don't want to have to throw my arm all the way to the corner to grab something out of the corner. I'd like to very quickly jump to the corner.
Right. That brings up some interesting points, and this brings us to a nice segue in this conference, because if we're not aware, there's a rule for all conferences on web development technology, 2008, and you have to talk about social media. And I'm wondering about social media in the context of touch-based interfaces. And I'm wondering about it, I think, from the expectation that we've seen touch-based interfaces in things like the iPhone, right? And we've seen the promise of what things like Surface will do. But what about when we talk about big displays that are public displays in community areas? And one of the things I think about is, I'm from Chicago, so whenever I walk through O'Hare at American's Terminal, they've got a big touch screen interface there that multiple people can interact with at once. And Dale, I know you had a little bit of something to do with that. Could you talk a little bit about that? Maybe I could show the audience some of that?
Yeah, while you're playing that, this is for Accenture, and it's about a 6-foot by 10-foot wall. It works like touchscreen, but one of the things I want to bring up in this conversation is that it's interesting. I'm sitting here right now, we're using the word touch, and you're indeed not touching the screen in the gesture that we are when you're at a distance. So it becomes virtual touch and kind of a different conversation. But what this one does, what you're seeing on there is that, and the idea of public media is exactly what we're talking about with this project. You see the line down the middle, it's actually mirrored. 2 people can use this. But the bottom of the screen is about waist high, and so when somebody is using it, there's another level of audience that's observing it from behind. And for Accenture, that's their target audience, because this is an ad for executives. I mean, Accenture is not a consumer brand. It's for executives and for their high-end consulting, for businesses. So their audience is actually watching other people use this. So, so there's a broader audience. And certainly privacy goes away in public media like this. So it's a different kind of thing going on. You wouldn't do anything private in a world
Absolutely.
like this. So.
And it seems to me that just exposes a whole new paradigm that we need to think about when we think about the design language and the interactions. And especially like right now, we're very much at an interface where we have to actually touch something to make it move. Or, as you said, air-based gestures, I think is what we call them, where you do things in the air and we impact something. But when we start combining that with voice, I got to be honest, it seems like it's a fantastically complex challenge. Maybe one that we think should be really easy, but it's not. We've all been inculcated on this world of Star Trek where you just talk into your shirt and automatically, the system knows who to reach and communicate. But if you really think about how hard it would be to do something like that, it'd be incredibly hard. And it seems like touch-based interfaces are kind of similar to that. So the next area that I wanted to ask about a little bit was voice-based interfaces. And Yoshihiro, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about voice-based interfaces that you've designed. And maybe I could show the audience a little bit of what we'll do, and I'll pull that up real quick.
Yeah. It's for demo for kiosk application of its learning on XP embedded and with WPF technology. We made this demo for a music store. The customers are able to search music which they want by natural conversation and touching display. This application is totally controlled by voice and touch, like this. When we say next, they can move to next. And what we expect from this kind of system is very simple. We just want users to have regular conversation with it. But voice recognition technology is not enough now, so there are some challenges there.
Okay. And it reminds me a little bit, Doug, of what you were talking about. There's I've had other sessions where we talk about the semantic web, right, and all the challenges we have around the semantic web and really understanding what people want. And we've had other panelists, Cheered Hook from Frog Design, said, the mouse and the keyboard is still pretty cool. It still works pretty well, right? And it seems to me that touch-based interfaces where we touch the screen, we're kind of starting to understand that, right? We're starting to understand air-based gestures. We know how we want voice to work, and it's not quite there. But what aren't we doing yet that we might think of in the future? And Dale, I know that you and I have talked about, some other things that maybe the audience isn't familiar with that we're starting to see become more mainstream that you could share.
Yeah, I just came from GDC, which was it last week, GDC? Yeah. And I was working with a company called Emotive, where that's the brainwave reader that actually has a real product now. You can buy it for Christmas. But the interesting thing is that you could indeed use that, and they showed some games where you could, for example, where you could cognitively just think things. You just think different actions, you can move things around. Maybe it's because our state of our human being state, that in evolution, that we're not, that's still pretty intense, pretty focused and difficult. It's not very efficient. But what's really interesting about it is sort of the I always say unconscious. It's the non-conscious stuff that it provides. So when you, if you play there's a couple of movies there.
Sure.
There's a thing called Immortal, which is
Portal? Okay.
Any of those there. Whoops, that's playing really.
Ooh, that's funny looking.
Really
strange.
Another one. Anyway, but there you go. That's better. So the idea, this is the Portal site, kind of application download on the web. But basically, it'll navigate. The navigation is done with two things. One of it is the overt navigation, either with gesture or with the mouse or a game controller that actually navigates through there. And it's gesturally based, so just things are on the left, things are on the right. But what's going on here is some of the stuff that's coming at you is because when you have the headset on, it's picking up your moods and other kind of non-conscious thinking that actually starts to change the environment and bring up content that's based on your mood. So what's happening here is you're picking up stuff that you, rather than have to, an example would be playing a game. While you're playing a game with the headset on, it will automatically change the level of the game because it's picking up the difference between boredom and frustration. So it knows these things. You would normally have to manually enter that feedback in, but it picks it up normally.
So this means that I'll finally be able to change the channel without doing anything in the future, it sounds like.
That's right.
So I'm curious, we've talked a little bit about thought, and we've talked a little bit about touch gestures. We've talked a little bit about air gestures and voice. Are there other trends that you guys see in the future that you think about or that you wish we could manipulate better? And Daniel, I'd love to start with you. I know that you get tasked with thinking about this kind of stuff a lot.
Yeah. I think, right now, Surface is really focused on a very limited sense of part of human input, really just on touch. We're not, exploring air-based gestures that much, particularly because we want to ensure a very simple, direct, successful experience. But our philosophy is such that we feel that any degree of human sensing gives us the possibility of creating a whole new range of interaction. So whether it's brainwaves, whether it's proximity, whether it's the sweat on my hands, whether it's there's a framework out there when you talk about natural user interfaces called STAG, right? Speech, touch, and gesture. But we recognize that that there's a much wider range of human experiences and human input that can be sensed. And with each one of those, I think the examples that you talked about around judging, brainwave activity, there may be things that can be sensed that we're not even aware of ourselves. I think our technology would allow for that. And I think we need a principle-based approach to make decisions about how and when do we use that input. So for Surface, the one thing I'll mention that we are thinking heavily about is devices. So these are objects that a human owns that, when close to or interacted with the table, comes to life and is one that's not in the standard kind of language of interaction, but is one that we feel is really important, device recognition and experience.
Yeah, actually, just to follow that up, that's one thing I think about a lot, too, is just the notion of proximity. We mentioned Minority Report, and everybody, thinks of the data gloves and interacting with things kind of like a marionette. But I actually think some of the more interesting aspects of that movie are when, Tom Cruise walks into his house and the lights turn on. I think he says home or something like this, but there's all sorts of, more.
I think Bill Gates has that now, by the way.
There's all sorts of kind of quiet technology that's much more natural. Like, why can't I go home and depending on what room I'm in, it adjusts the airflow, it adjusts my system. Like, they're things that can be happening based on proximity, where I don't even have to be explicitly involved in the interaction. And in terms of touch, I think there's other things to think about that aren't so literal as well. Like, my phone, why can't I just flip it over and have it reroute calls to voicemail? Or, maybe I can shake it to clear. Or, there's other things that can be less literal in terms of the UI that I think are there are opportunities there.
Yeah, I think another challenge is both giving people choice as well as maybe our taste. And what I mean by choice is kind of regardless of whether this is touchscreen or voice or whatever, let's just go to the mouse and actions and gestures like drag and drop. Some people like them, they're obvious to some people, and some people they're not. A hover over with a button that drops out that adds it, say, to a bin rather than dragging it to a bin provides choice and makes for a more natural interface, right? And what I mean by taste is these things are so amazing to many of us, and our taste level or our impression level is so low that we do one gesture and move something and slide it, and that's very impressive to us today. But I think of voice, we're at this least common denominator where we'll go to a device, home, or next, or previous, or off, or on. We're complicated, emotional, interactive people. Talking like Ugg the caveman, right, is really going to turn us off to these devices if we can't solve some more computational computer science things like how do we meld natural language into speech recognition so I can say, jump to the next record, please, right? Or forward or whatever in a more natural way. I know in a lot of voice systems I come in and hear next, previous, home. You actually get tired of it, and as an emotional creature, it's not as fun to use.
I'm really interested in sort of the GUI-less interface. I mean, it's less and less interface. I mean, I think we're used to seeing screens and screens of. I mean, I'm from the world of interactive television, with these complicated screens. You move the cursors around, click buttons, and multiple layers of things, genres. You know, we've all seen interfaces just have too many pixels on the screen. So getting the things that you could just simply picking up all sorts of other things, as we've said, proximity. There's a lot of information that's given that we don't need to register anymore. I mean, it's automatic. And systems that are smarter, too, that can actually give us a lot of stuff automatically because it really knows us very well. And what we've talked about at Schematic about interfaces for television, there's a company we're working with Gesture that doesn't use just you in the room. There's no glove, no anything, no glove, which was like in Minority Report. But the original vision we had for some of us at Minority was that there isn't any. You could just walk up to the screen and move your hands. But in a TV mode, can that be very subtle? Can you just sit on your couch and kind of go like this? You know, just little subtle things, and it's getting there. The subtlety of how you can do very simple things, not toy waving your arms around and getting tired, you know, because of course we're thinking about the TV audience, which is you want to work at it, you know, just little subtle things.
Interesting. So it sounds to me like one of the challenges that we have right now is when I look at consumer electronics, we are just as a culture starting there's a Hasso Plattner who used to run SAP used to have a term that developers have an erotic fixation with code. And I think consumers have an erotic fixation with consumer products right now, right? We're developing very emotional connections to a lot of the products that we use. And it seems that the emotional aspects of touch-based computing are a really critical aspect of this, right? And especially when we think of voice and we think of gestures. And also understanding how these gestures needs to work. I remember Yoshihiro and I were talking about how there was an interface where you had to make the shape of a mountain to tell the car to do something. We talked about, well, how would anybody know to do that? And one of the challenges to me seems to be, how do you make people know what you should do, right? I mean, it's almost we have a common language for the web right now. It's like put a banner on the left and you're done, you know? But when we start thinking about these new interfaces, it's like, where do you get started? And how do you think about educating somebody to use something? Or does it have to be that, like if I build a cell phone and I show pictures and to change pictures, I want to have you flick the cell phone. How do I impart that type of knowledge? And do you guys see challenges around educating people how to use this type of thing?
Yeah. I mean, one really small example, I'm sure there's larger strategies, but because we feel we're in a transition stage, we have a number of ways that you can manipulate objects on our team. So it's really important for us. Most of our scenarios for the first version of Surface will be in these walk-up commercial venues. So you'd walk into a hotel lobby, or you'd walk into a retail store. And everyone's a novice user, so we're designing for these really simple experiences. So having a mountain or some other undiscoverable gesture is unacceptable. But what we said is, well, let's at least design the gesture. And if you take another action, say a simple on-demand menu, for example, and it says, whatever the command is, that we then reference what the gesture would be, so that it reinforces subtly the alternate way to get there.
So the style guide of gestures almost.
That's right. I mean, there's creepy ways to do that where you have a video of hands coming up. You're like, oh my God, what's happening? Yeah. Or there's subtle ways of doing it. So the visual representation of how we'll do that is still being determined. But the concept of allowing for that type of learned interaction on different levels is something that's really important.
Yeah, especially, I think you got to make them somewhat obvious, right? I mean, to go back to Star Trek, those doors didn't open every time somebody walked by the doors. Right? The doors only opened when somebody obviously approached the door to walk through it. Or if
How
you
did
take
the elevator know where it was going too all the time?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And you can see cases where if they're not super obvious that the hand wave was a fly, right? And all of a sudden your television changes channels. So I think there is value in having almost a style sheet or a cookbook of accepted gestures, but framed inside of that broad strokes of reality, so they were at least approachable and you could emotionally connect with them. And that's true of, at Synergy, even with the RAs we're designing today, right? How do we take the thing of the Fizz Pop deal that looked like a thumb wheel and acted like a thumb wheel? That had the broad stroke reality that when it spun, it slowed down in a physics kind of way. But I don't think there's anything wrong with making them really obvious, too.
I mean, I think the best trick is to make it similar to how you interact with objects in the real world. I mean, I think people want to interact with the digital world just like they interact with things in the physical world. If you look at a lot of the advances in interaction design, tons of new animations now, most of them are physics-based, right? They have motion, they have a certain amount of velocity, a certain amount of drag, a certain amount of gravity, right? People respond to those, and there's an emotional connection to that because that's what they're used to. So I think, you make a very engaging experience that's discoverable, but you also don't lose sight of the fact that you want to leverage natural communication, natural behaviors.
So the next question I wanted to ask, and do people have questions? We'll start questions. If I give us 30 minutes for questions, is that a good starting point? So think about questions for these guys. But I have a question about, is there anything that you wish that you just had right now that you don't have around touch interfaces? And I'd love to start like Doug. I mean, are there things you wish technology and hardware could do now that it just doesn't do?
From a technical standpoint or from a
Sure, from a technical standpoint, or
I have an iPhone. I mean, what more do you really want?
Yeah.
Maybe a larger one, a tablet.
Okay.
No, I mean, from a technical standpoint, I mean, one of the great things about WPF is there's a lot of bundled things already in there. There's inking, right? There's speech. I think everyone's looking forward to what may come out of Surface in terms of an SDK or some sort of dictionary of natural gestures. Because right now you can experiment a lot with WPF or with other technologies with touch, but you really need sort of more robust SDKs around sort of identifying some of these gestures. So like the iPhone just came out with an SDK. It's like, that's great. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of experimentation in the field, but at the end of the day, I'd really like to have a more robust set of, defined behaviors. Because right now, it's great that touchscreens are fairly affordable, and even with WPF, you can do quite a bit just on a capacitive screen with, single touch. But when you start to actually develop a touch application, you quickly find yourself having to make allowances for different event handling and things that are just different because it's not a 2-foot sort of experience. So from a technical point, I'd like that. But from just a personal standpoint, I mean, I don't want to like plug the iPhone too much, but the one fear I have, and it's inevitable though, is developers are great at developing technology. But in my experience, they haven't been the greatest at applying it. I think good products work, but I think great products inspire. I haven't had a cell phone for 10 years, and then the iPhone came out. And I flipped through, I loaded it up with photos. That is a true story.
I
loaded it up with photos, and I was like, that wasn't that long a wait. Yep. I mean, it's so empowering that it makes you feel like a magician. My parents can browse their photos and albums on my phone more easily than they can do that on their desktop. So that's a problem, and that's something we need to overcome. So making even the 2-foot experience, more accessible, more task-oriented might be a good start. I realize that's a little off topic in terms of what I like in terms of touch, but.
Yeah, I think it's not restricted to just touch, but it's back to more choice, right? So many of these gestures, you have to know the gesture. So to pick on the iPhone, right? If you want to move elements around on the home screen, you have to know that you have to press and hold for 3 seconds to get them to jiggle to then slide them around.
But who doesn't know that, though? I mean,
but you knew it because you watched a video or you read the documentation. If you hadn't watched the video or read the documentation, someone had handed you an iPhone and said, move the icons, right? You might not be able to move them. And it could be throwing things away. So is throwing things away pushing in the corner or scrunching your hands or these things. And a lot of this comes out of, I think, a more user-centric approach, right? I mean, for years we wrote software and we presented data in rows and columns. Why? Because it was in the database in rows and columns, and so programmers think that way, and if it's in the database in rows and columns, I'll show it in rows and columns. And if we can focus on building the experiences first and those experiences and provide people choice on all these things, it's, I think, a place we need to work more.
So Dale, we can read brainwaves. Right. Is there anything else that's missing in your toolbox?
Well, the thing that I would really like, and I'll reference the television experience, and is I want speed in there. I mean, things are way too late. The latency on cable boxes, you click the button and it takes 3 seconds to change. I mean, I want that responsive power of real fast spin through things. You get some of that on the iPhone, but I want that. That's because the operating system sits in there. That's a pretty powerful little engine sitting on that iPhone. I want that kind of power in set-top boxes and the things that power our television and things like that. That's what I want. I want to be able to look like that and spin through a whole bunch of movies and stop like that, watch that one go like this. That's a lot of processing power, but that's what I want.
Yeah.
To be honest, I feel like we have more than enough right now that we can handle, to be quite frank. I mean, one of the things that we have, because we can see beyond the surface, we can know where someone's sitting. So as someone touches, it's not just pressure, but we can see that finger shadow. And so thinking about the interaction model of, well, do we automatically rotate content to show someone where they're touching? We've talked about, there's all kinds of interesting scenarios. We can detect, cat paw prints. So, do we think about interesting scenarios where there's...
What happens when the dog gets on your surface?
That's right. Do you scare it away so it won't scratch? Or, but I think, for me, looking towards the future, it's not a technology that doesn't exist, but I think that voice is... as complicated as it is, with all the issues around false positives, with all the challenges of being explicit about activating voice versus not trying to activate voice, I feel that from a verbal perspective, we can hold a lot more commands and words and ideas in our head. And so that if we have this marriage between a set of primary, direct, simple, intuitive, physical gestures married with a richer verbal vocabulary and finding elegant ways to bring those together, I'm really excited about that in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I want to do one last circuit, and I'm going to start with Yoshihiro. How hard is it to find people to work at Second Factory that are good at this type of work? And what do you look for in a designer? Like, for example, you start with paper prototyping a lot with your modeling, and then you move into more complicated techniques. But what type of skills and roles do you look to fill in your company? Well, you have tell us about your role in Second Factory and what you do.
My role is experience designer.
Right, and you have a counterpart, Ken.
And also my role is project manager.
Mm-hmm.
And experienced architect is very important for us to create a new experiences, the new technology. Mm-hmm. Sitting over there, Ken, and he's one of our experienced architects.
Okay.
And also has interaction designer and graphic designer. Mm-hmm. And system developer. Right. Yeah. And
do you find it hard to find all the people that are good at doing that to work together right now?
Yes.
Yeah. And I wanted to move down to you. Like, I know on the Surface team, because we know a lot of our peers and colleagues, have some very unusual backgrounds.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And if we look at some of the work models, and Dale, I would suspect this is true of you from your background too, we're developing some very different working models to think about how we design software and applications, especially when we think about some of the paradigms of filmmaking. Right? Yeah. Or writing script. And also the idea that even though we're working with such advanced technology, sometimes we just start with paper and a Sharpie to do things.
Yeah, there's two things there. One is the type of skills and talents that you bring on board. Quite frankly, our top requirement is multi-touch design experience, which maybe 5 people on the planet can claim to have, right?
Who's a good time machine mechanic or something like that, right?
We're hiring some of the people that do have that type of experience, whether it's some of the other multi-touch systems that have been in early research labs, et cetera. But in the absence of having that, you need to bring together, I think, a skill set that has just a way of approaching technology. So I manage the interaction design team. I have a counterpart who's our creative director, who manages all visual design, audio design, and industrial design. So one place that does a common look and feel. My team is free to explore all the gestures and behaviors and all the interaction language, and his team is free to bring all that to life. And he has a film background. He's been at EA in the games community. He'll be at South by Southwest.
That'll be Evan Hirsch, who will moderate our panel at South by Southwest.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I think one of the requirements for not getting a job at Surface is necessarily having, deep client Windows UI design experience. Not that we'll turn folks like that away, but that's we're explicitly coming up with a new interface, a new interaction model. So we take a really hard look at folks that have deep and rich and have done, all kinds of standard interface, unless they have deep empathy for people and they're able to prototype and sketch and are open to new possibilities.
Dale, what kind of skill set do you look for when people work on your teams with some of the stuff that you've done recently?
Yeah, it's really people who can think out of the box. I'm looking at Jason down here, who's head of our user experience at Schematic. And our divisions of user experience, information architecture, all that, the designers work together. The creatives, we all work together. There is no over-the-wall, here's the flow chart. That world is gone for us. So we really work together. But because the things that we're working on are so moving it. I love this, moving into rich media. They're all animating. We need animators who we work with. The rapid prototyping. You can't just, we can't send a client just some still frames anymore. You've got to send an animation, quick. The wireframes are animated now. Yeah, you really have to get really fast thinking about how things move and how they move on the screen, which is so
momentum
critical.
and speed are very fast in your processes and what you look for, too. Dave, how about you? What do you look for at Synergy when you think about this type of stuff?
I think one of the biggest challenges is it's not just finding great designers and great developers, it's a cultural fit to do that as well. So, for the most part, you put a designer and a developer in the same room, it's like putting a humidifier and a dehumidifier in the same room and letting them duke it out, right? How do you create an environment where these people can truly collaborate and can swarm and can grease up a monitor and can say, from the developer, what were you getting at here in this comp and in this interactive design? I understand it. Let me extend on that, bring it back to the designer, maybe put a little taste on top of it and tone it down and bring it back. And so we're doing not only, one, you got to find great people, but two, you got to find the right cultural fit. So we actually run through a series of interviews of they're a technical fit, all higher votes, onto a cultural fit. Can they fit into this environment? And then the third is the kinds of spaces that we're putting people into. Not gray cubicle farms. They're open, collaborative couches, coffee tables, because you got to get these people into an environment where they'll work together.
Doug, any last thoughts from you?
I would just concur with most of what's said. Obviously, an iterative development style, some way to quickly test a lot of assumptions, a willingness to make mistakes, especially with touch. In terms of the types of people, I think obviously cross-disciplinary type backgrounds, creative people, but I think most importantly, it's just people who have a passion for creating something new and something engaging. The best way to form a team is to make sure everyone on the team has a shared understanding of where they're going. Obviously, if everyone works in the same place, that helps with the communication. But I think the key to kind of really creating these great experiences is that obviously, the designers can't just throw it over to the developers. There has to be a shared vision, so people have to sit down, and it's not pretty. It can be chaotic sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think that's the challenge, and I think making great products is hard.
Okay. So do we have questions in the audience from anybody? What I'd love you to do is come up to the microphone so we can form a line. And we've got 25 minutes. We want to capture all the questions on audio. I will offer that I will have to cut it off if we run out of time. But I'll be happy to give people my cards, and I can follow up with the team to answer some questions we have. We also, everybody is aware that there is a surface here that you can go look at, right? That's not news to anybody? It's in the
Sandbox.
open spaces room, the sandbox. So it's an unusual opportunity to get to see them all the time. So I highly, highly encourage you to go see one before you leave Mix, because it's a great opportunity and a benefit that we get. And let's go. Boy, this is a lot of questions, guys. So let's
keep it quick.
Yes.
Sort of curious, kind of how much you've sort of thought in terms of, if you would, the ergonomics of these sort of interface. Where people are sort of an interface that people are using all day, or that they might be using, half paying attention to, and kind of what some of your thoughts are in that.
Anybody want to take a stab at that one?
You can go ahead. And
I'll start.
We built one, so
Yeah, it's probably related to. I mean, what I was
Yeah.
thinking, one of the things we've dealt with gesture interfaces is the first ones that we had were like they were too high and your arm wears out. I mean, you know, from being up like this. So being able to have the system sense and you're down here and the motions are quite small, so you're not wearing yourself out. So we think about that a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely industrial design plays a part. I think the aesthetics of an object, definitely you can infer how to interact with that object if it's designed well.
And some of it is ergonomic. You have a dominant hand,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you have to figure that out and make the gesture obvious, but not so obvious that you're, finding things up. It's hard.
Hi, it's been really exciting and interesting to hear what you guys have been up to, and anybody who's sat and played with a Surface can't help but want one at home. And this is all very consumer focused, and it's really exciting how we can interact with our media, with videos, with photos, and we can flick through artists lists and all the rest of it. But let's face it, on a day-to-day basis, a lot of us, especially those of us in this room, don't really interact with those kind of things all day. We're doing a lot of, developers in this room, we're doing a lot of entry, we're writing code, and other people in their day-to-day business lives, they're going to be writing emails a lot, using instant messenger a lot and things like that. And let's face it, as we've kind of discussed today, we're still not talking to our computers. We're not doing all of this entry of text through speech. So is speech something that you see as something that is going to work one day, or do you see there being other ways of getting that kind of input into a computer?
I mean, I don't know if you've tried any of the speech recognition technologies and that it just come with Vista.
Yeah, I have.
And I know there's a learning curve, I think, for some folks.
You soon stop using it. Like you said, it gets very jarring saying next or do this, do that, and when it doesn't recognise what you said because
It's
I'm English and not
frustrating,
American, it soon wears off.
Yeah, and I think so. I think we have some a ways to go. I do know some designers at Microsoft who have gone. They no longer use keyboard and mice, and they've completely has switched over and gone through that pain. So I think there's some ways to do it. I mean, from my perspective, we don't have to do everything that you do with the computer today. It doesn't have to be a primary natural touch experience. And I feel that we have different, like a GUI is really great for some things, and we should retain that. And a NUI, natural user interface, is really good for some other things. And I don't think this whole paradigm shift around touch is only about let's do all the old stuff in new ways. Let's do new stuff in new ways and really think about what's best in those scenarios. But I'm excited about the possibilities of touch tablets, so not just stylus, but how can that help? And I think you're right, especially when you're doing large amounts of input. Speech holds the promise, but isn't there yet.
Probably don't want to port the green screen to a natural touch interface.
That's right.
The thing that with Minority Report, I'll bring up one thing that we mocked up then. It wasn't used in the film, but we said because textual input, I mean input like a keyboard or whatever, is essential, and it's the hardest thing when you don't have a keyboard in front of you when you're just trying to do. So we said that it might be something like signing, a language. Motion detection will pick up. It'll be something like signing. You'll do this in front of a screen without you wouldn't need a keyboard or anything else. But I mean, I believe that voice is really great in certain situations. I'll give you an example. For search on a television interface, the remote control was easier to just navigate around, but then there's a microphone on the end of it. You just go up, and if you're searching, you just say friends, there's friends. It was much easier than typing in F-R-I-E-N.
Yeah.
So things like that. So it kind of flips back and forth.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
I just wanted to kind of related question. I'm sure you all saw a story about a year ago about the guy who altered his finger to a point after the iPhone came out. It was obviously fake. I just wondered,
was that fake or real? Or?
That's
sure
fake.
it was.
That was fake.
I just wondered, do you see styluses having a future? Because handwriting is still obviously very important. I mean, you've not really talked about it. As much as the kind of Marcel Marceau touch interface is there, where do you see handwriting going in the future? Do you see it having a future?
I mean, I think it depends. It kind of goes back to Daniel says. I think it's not about applying all these things everywhere. With handwriting, I think definitely the healthcare industry, there is a lot of annotation that goes on in terms of medical reports and whatnot. And I think there probably are workflows where the stylus is going to be faster.
Not only do I think it still has a role, but I actually think there's going to be an explosion of new objects. I mean, so if you go to the sandbox and just We have the simple paint demo. I mean, paintbrushes, can be used, and other objects for stamping. So I think any objects that we interact with that have some connection to what our scenario or goal is, we should start to consider. So I actually think it's going to go the other way. I think it's, instead of going away, it's going to explode.
Next question.
I have lots of questions, but I'm going to move to one. I worked on a touchscreen interface a while back, and our biggest challenge was accessibility. And I was curious what experiences you've had with multi-touch and touch interfaces dealing with limited mobility.
Let me jump into that because that emotive product that I was mentioning with the headset is actually specifically really great for. There are a lot of things you could do with the headset that it actually. I mean, it has a gyroscope, and you can tell us what you're looking at. So, in terms of interfacing with a screen, that was it offers some solutions. That's emotiv, noe.com. You can see on their website.
Mm-hmm. And I think something to think about with accessibility is how many people have to think a lot about accessibility when they build things? There's always going to be multiple channels and experiences you have. There may be touch or gesture-based interfaces that are going to be impossible for some people to use, right? But that's why we need to think holistically about systems that we use, right? That's why you may have a rich interactive website and you may have a standards-based one that is accessible to screen readers. And I think all of these challenges we have today don't go away at all with touch-based interfaces, but you don't treat them any differently either, right? You just need to understand your audiences, and you need to understand what type of experience you're going to be able to provide for them as well.
Choice, right?
Yeah. Next question.
You guys have talked a lot today about trying to make gestures natural and figure out, so you don't have to teach people gestures. But, I'm wondering if you guys have, or, what your thought processes are on consistency in gestures across devices. As these things become more popular and you're seeing Surface and potentially other devices hitting the market, are you guys worried about, different interpretations of, things as simple as, I want to move this across, or I want to make this bigger, especially with companies like Apple now putting patents out on gestures on their trackpads and things like that. Just, kind of what are your guys' thoughts on that?
So we have an active project that augments some of the initial kind of intuitive gestures that we've developed as we solve individual problems that have emerged. I mean, there are a series of basic conventions that are emerging, right? The two-finger stretch. We say it's natural. I mean, none of us can take a real object in the real world and do that. I mean, you can take silly putty and stretch it, but yet it's becoming a standard. But for a lot of other things where it's not a standard, we need to make conscious choices. So for us, we feel it needs to be research-based. It's not just design pontification. It's about what do children do, right? What do people that haven't been polluted with all the conventions of standard computing interfaces, what are their natural reactions and how to manipulate things or how to do things? What about the signing community, glossing and ASL? What are expert gestures, strategies for doing those things? So we actually have an active project on our side to create that dictionary, that vocabulary. But it's really early, and I can't make any promises that it'll come out. But it's really important to figure that out.
I think another interesting end to that, anyway, is that definitely there's going to be probably universal gestures. But I think you're also going to find that appliances and devices, they're going to become very custom for the tasks that they're involved in. So I would expect different devices to have different types of gestures depending on the workflow that you're supporting. Like one things we've played around with, like this idea of a touch screen DJ. There's going to be certain things that people are used to interacting, certain gestures that you might not use if you go to air traffic control or something like this. So I would expect not only will there be common dictionaries.
One might cause a massive accident if you did that across the screen.
Yeah, definitely. So not only are there going to be common dictionaries, I think there's also going to be specialized dictionaries depending on what the workflow is. Apple also acquired Fingerworks, I think, a couple of years ago, and it can be so complex that you'll soon have touchscreens that can figure out the size and which fingers you're putting down, because your thumb is a larger size than an index finger. And you could potentially have different things with your pinky. This company went so far as to start creating a dictionary of actual chords based on different combinations of multipoint. the idea that there's going to be a common dictionary that for all devices is, I think there'll be a base set of universal.
One little anecdote is, and maybe I shouldn't go into too much detail here, but we've been struggling with the idea of double tap or double touch. Because, I mean, honestly, it's not the most natural thing, right? When you have someone that hasn't used computers and they're interacting with objects, they're not like, to access something, they grab it and they go. But yet it's this really primary learned gesture that we all have experienced with, with the mouse and the computer. And it's one that, folks like iPhones and others use to zoom in on things and to do objects. But because our vision is one around creating this new paradigm for the next 20, 30 years, we're really focused on avoiding anything that has a particular relationship to what we feel is an older UI. So it's one that, for example, that we decided let's not do that, and we have to find other strategies. But it's a really interesting question about when you want to create something that's intuitive around a future vision, and you have other mental models that people are using. It's a real challenge about how to do that well.
Okay. Next question.
I think the one common theme that we continue to hear among the panel here is that it's so much more difficult to create a user interface that is simple. It's a factor of 10 times more difficult. I speak from experience. I've co-founded 2 companies based upon software that's touchscreen based, first in the hospitality industry, now today in the healthcare industry. And you guys brought up some topics of things that are difficult that you have to think about when designing touchscreen software. One is the mouse over. You really don't have to worry about a mouse over because you know where your finger's going. So you don't have to. The mouse over effect is just a nice flash addition to a website. The other part is something you have to think about is the arm actually when it goes across the screen. You got a left side and a right side of the user interface. So if you have interaction down one side, you'll block part of your screen. So you have to be recognizing, is the user left-handed or right-handed. If we can have user interfaces that recognize that approach, you're going to be blocking less of the screen. Mm-hmm. A couple other topics. One of the challenges over the past 15 years that I've had with touchscreen user interfaces is definitely the device. As the resolution changed over time, the tools that we've had to develop software, of course, you have very static user interfaces. So as the resolution increased, to re-architect our product was a nightmare. So I applaud Microsoft for bringing WPF to the table because it's totally changed that completely. So now you're somewhat agnostic to the device, which is wonderful. And one recommendation for Surface, we need a flat surface. I think it's beautiful for having a tabletop surface, but when you get into the verticals like healthcare, we need, for collaboration with the patient, for example, it's got to have some sort of surface that we can put over the bed. And I know you guys are hopefully going to be working on that at some point, but I think...
You don't like the big-ass table?
I actually enjoy it. I know it will have some application in healthcare. As a matter of fact, I plan to be working with the Surface team soon on this. But the last is Double Touch. I've been using Double Touch in touchscreen software now since day one in '92, and it works. It takes 10 seconds to train Double Touch, and they use it every time. And I know this is a vertical application that I'm referring to, but Double Touch does work, and it's the replacement for the right click on the mouse. So that work.
I think, too, a lot of what you said, though, is not just about touch, right? I think Dale said it earlier. When you start to look at these RAAs that you're seeing coming out of things like Silverlight and WPF, it's count the buttons, right? It used to be for a long time, all software we wrote was a gray background, button bar at the top, tree view on the left, form field on the right. And that's, so one, getting away, what you're saying is simplifying these things, right? But secondly, when we start talking about, and when I kind of cringe about these cookbooks of gestures and these standards, we had that in MFC, right? And we had these standards, and what it led to was a taste problem, where maybe originally it was a smattering of 2 or 3 buttons and sometimes a tree view. Immediately everybody grasps on that as they're new because our skill develops less quickly than our taste, right? And so we end up with software with just, reams of buttons and tree views. And what that means is software that is not task-oriented, that's not saying, you must do this, now do it. It's by rote and memorization and process-oriented. And I think you're seeing all these trends in RAAs. So it's not just touch screens that these things are a big deal on.
Thank you very much for your commentary.
Two-part question, really. The first part is resistance to change. All of your shirts still have buttons on them. There have been better keyboard solutions that don't get adopted due to resistance to change. I mean, QWERTY was designed to slow you down, not to speed you up. So how do you, and the other part of that is, it's about screen real estate. Yes, the screen real estate can change, but it's still finite. You have to deal with it. So how do you deal with those resistance to change issues? That's the first part of the question. And then the second part of the question really is, you guys have given us a great view of user interfaces 60 years into the future, but where are we going to be in the next 3 to 5 years? I really can't see myself standing in front of my computer kind of conducting it on a day-to-day basis just yet. So what's the next kind of horizon for user interface over the next 3 to 5 years?
When did Minority Report come out?
About 7 years ago.
7 years ago. So I think that the one thing to keep in mind is these things are progressing much faster. I mean, Dale had said we were trying to invent something maybe 60 years ahead, right? Now, I'm not saying that what we've done with Maestro is productive, right, today and production level today, but I wouldn't doubt how fast the evolution and innovation is coming in these things.
And I think one way, and this is speaking for Microsoft, we're very pragmatic. We look at economics, right? Look at the Nintendo Wii. Who would have thought 5 years ago that you might spend pastime and have a beer with a friend doing a virtual bowling game in your family room, right? And that's a very real act that millions of people all over the world do today. Or look at the success, and we sound like a commercial for the iPhone here, but look at the rapid uptake and adoption of the iPhone, where we have people that won't buy a cellular phone, actually buy an iPhone. I think that what's going to really influence people to change is delight and how things make us feel. And this is a theme that came up in some other panels that we've had here too, that we're in the business of understanding feeling and emotion. And I think where touch interfaces will help people change is when we hit that emotional level, right? Where you bring that delight to an experience.
Let me just add one thing about I really believe that the roadmap for getting to these kind of crazy interface we've been talking about here is an incremental one. And we're talking to cable companies now about using multiple inputs, whatever's comfortable for you. And the key is, can that interface that's on the screen can it work for all of them? That's a big task. But being able to, let me just describe a scenario. And this is for people just watching media on your computer. When you're up close to it, you have your keyboard, you're going to do a lot of work. When you want to pull back and watch, you push back. Maybe it just detects that, and your keyboard is far away from you. Can you start gesturing then? So I think things like that where it's used appropriately for what is needed, not for everything. So.
Yeah. And I have to go back to what Chris said. I mean, room full of programmers mostly? Lots of programmers around? I mean, how many people thought that you would be coming to a development conference where we'd be saying, don't you want your software to be rich, engaging, sticky, delightful, right? But that's the trend today that we're seeing, and Chris is right. How do you make CRM or ERP or inventory control delightful and engaging and rich and sticky and fun to use? Because it gets back again to what Chris said in terms of the economics. Making a more productive workforce is wanting to use these tools, finding the tools fun to use, and I think this is a disruption going on today, and it's what's made these technologies.
Worker is a productive worker? Is that what I just heard you say?
That's it.
Well, thank you very much for your question.
Hi, I would know about your visions and about trends and tools for giving feedback to the user from the application, perhaps both on screen by using physics simulation, or perhaps also both going beyond the screen by not only an Xbox 360 controller that is vibrating.
Yeah, we didn't talk about haptics.
Well, so yeah, I mean, and maybe this touches on the other person's comment to some extent, with challenges with touchscreen, the on-screen keyboard is a pretty good example. I know that there's like 2 Glasgow University students that evidently prototyped an iPhone where they somehow used the iPhone's actuator to, mimic certain haptic responses so that when you were going over the keyboard, you could actually feel the edges of the buttons. Now, I don't know how successful that was, but certainly there's going to be things like that that are going to be necessary if you really want to start overcoming, the keyboard. It wouldn't be something I would necessarily want to take on.
Yeah, I think haptics is on its way. Right now, we're really limited to more single point haptics that can be located anywhere on a screen. But for multi-point, richer haptics is something that I think has some maturity.
Have you copyrighted that term yet? Rich haptics.
Rich haptics, I should. I can't anymore. I publicly disclose it.
Yep.
But I also think that, I mean, just a really simple thing that, has been used forever, I mean, just auditory feedback and making sure that we give appropriate auditory cues for not only what's possible, but, that what's just happened, what's about to happen. It's something that is, really simple, but it can be very powerful to help give that a richer feedback.
Okay. Thank you for your question. So we've got 5 minutes, 3 more questions. I just want to set some expectations here. I want to ask if the panelists, do you guys mind going over to the open spaces area after we're done here? And if there's a few trailing questions, you can kind of stalk the panelists over into the open spaces area, and they might have time for a few questions before our next session starts. Also, I just want to remind folks, if you're going to South by Southwest, we've got a great companion piece to this panel, so I highly encourage you to check it out. And I'm sorry, next question.
Oh, and real quick, we're bringing a Maestro to South by Southwest.
That's true.
Right?
We will actually
so
be able to see a Maestro
at
at South by Southwest.
Yeah.
So.
I have one of those wonderful Fingerworks keyboards, and right now we're seeing very simple gestures. Are any of you exploring modifiers and chords and what you can do with that in the touch-based interfaces?
As soon as Daniel mails me the large Surface prototype that he promised me, I thought everybody on the panel was getting one of those.
Wait, I thought he promised us that.
Yeah. I would love to start playing around with the multi-point touch. I'm familiar with the Fingerworks, but only conceptually.
Yeah. I'm not as familiar, and we explicitly are, don't look at any patents, et cetera, what's happening. But when you describe some of the interactions, I'm starting to get a little concerned inside again about, to me it feels like engineers thinking about how to use some sensing data to create a new language of interaction, and I get worried, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah,
so I feel like
we might want to master the simple things first.
Yeah. So I think just one thing on input, what we're looking at is inking, right? Inking is something that's been developed for tablet for a long time. And, inking with a stylus is very different from finger painting. And, we've got big fat fingers, right, that don't necessarily afford themselves to really good input. But we're looking at how can we shrink the writing size? Can we allow someone to write in a larger area but have it feel just right? So again, trying to have more natural ways that someone who, maybe is, has never used a keyboard before might find a little more natural.
Hi guys. So I work at a schematic, so a lot of the stuff, that Dale does and all that, it kind of keeps us impressing every day. But I'm wondering, we all talk about, what's coming up and, the future and all this. And this is, something that I discussed offline with Chris before and with Dale earlier. But we have the MacBook Air and we have the iPhone and we have the new MacBook Pros. I mean, with gestures-based, and touch on it, right? And this is something that we're having right now. And, but there are applications, so there are no, that are taking full advantage of it other than the iPhone. And it kind of showed that the customer are ready for gestures and are ready for touch. And that, it can be easily learned and all that. But it also worries me that, I saw a couple of days ago, somebody wrote like a really sneak script that, you can put on your Mac. And, now you can map gestures to, stroke keys on your Mac.
Right.
I mean,
it's just insane.
How that pollutes the experience for the future. I mean, because we're now, associating gestures to keystrokes that were not meant to be like that. So I mean, so I want to do a copy, I just move my hand and now it, it does the, control copy or, whatever in a computer. And, we are living now on a gesture-based society. Probably not a lot of us have enough money to go and change the computer every time, Apple put up some new stuff out there or anybody. But, and then the other one is, we're living that today. And how do you guys see, approaching that in a way that we can really empower those gestures for the future? Both on a desktop or on the iPhone, but on the web as well. I mean, where you can you move the mouse. We've done some of that experimentation. Ideas from Dell that you move the mouse some way and the UX behaves in a way, or it kind of exposes some data if you move the mouse from the other way. So it's more a reactive thing to movement, and we're not touching, but we're now kind of like getting in the middle that we're expecting too much. We as a society, we every time Apple put up a press release, we're expecting things from the future, and how do we, or how we as a community and driving all this, can take it.
Boy, I don't even know how to answer all of those, although I would say as a side little comment, I always like, as somebody else that talks with their hands, when people were telling us that they couldn't do gestures all day. We all do these things all day.
Yeah.
Although it did open an initial thought when you started thinking of the idea of gesture hacking on machines.
Yeah, that's a nice concept to take away from here, I think. Those are interesting concepts. Probably too complicated a conversation for us to wrap up in 90 seconds.
I mean, I think it's a strong statement to say we're living in a gesture world. I mean, I think there's a lot of great products and experiments, but I think the large majority of the population doesn't have the ability to interact with things in that way. And I do think there's a difference between taking existing paradigms and thinking about small gestures that allow me to move between a left swipe to go back on a web page, versus thinking about a natural interaction language and designing products around that as a primary. And I think that's what I don't think really we've seen as much as I'd like to see. But I hope that we get there.
Well, and it reminds me of some constraints, like those of us that have used an iPhone before, flicking through a browser page, depending how that page is designed, can be a very challenging task, right? So there are kinks that we still have to work out in how we use those experiences. Now, last question, Anthony, I'm not letting you ask a question, you're too late. Yeah.
Okay. You guys covered a lot of ways to interact with the hardware, so I was wondering, what do you think about eye tracking? Because I know it's pretty powerful in behavior studies, so can we use that in interaction design?
Go
ahead. No.
We're actually using eye tracking. We have an eye tracking lab in Schematic in New York through some technology from Ball State University that is used for testing, where you can track your eyes and map it against what people are looking at. And it's really great for studying user interfaces, graphic GUIs, to see how people understand interfaces. And is that what you're getting at? Is a utility for eye tracking?
Behavior studies, I was wondering if it is applicable to interaction design. Actually, can we use it in user interfaces to control something with eyes?
Yes.
The laziest way.
And actually, I'm not trying to promote emotive, but that project did that. Product does that. One of the features, without a camera on the headset, it's detecting instantly your eye motion, what directions your eyes are moving, your other expressions, smile, not smile, and other things like that. So there is feedback, and that's an interesting component, to navigation. So things will respond on the screen depending on what you're looking at. So,
especially when you're dealing with fluid interfaces in landscape, right?
Yeah.
The person's looking to the upper right, maybe that's the area that blows out and comes back and looks to the left.
Yeah, exactly.
And those are, again, these are just core RIA things. How do we make the most use of the limited amount of pixels that we have on the screen?
And I think it goes back to the principle that any degree of sensing, of human ability, whether it's where our eyes are looking at or what our thoughts are, allows us the opportunity to consider it for interaction. But I do know from one of my friends from I used to work with, the usability engineer. He put an eye tracking study and just put pictures of beautiful women and men up and just and it's in a public space just to see how people would react. And so I think there's some challenges about making sure that, because what we look at we think of as private, so having a way to make sure that that works well.